Hey Foundry Church, Pastor Mark here, and it's Wednesday of Holy Week, a day where we will typically read from these passages of John chapter 13, where Jesus is seated at the Last Supper with his disciples, and he informs them that one of them will betray him. Of course, we know that that's Judas, but the disciples don't know that at this point. And so we pick up in verse 21 of chapter 13. And it says, after saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit. And he testified, saying, truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. The disciples began to look around at one another, not knowing who it might be. And it says that John, one of the disciples that Jesus loved, that we know is John, who wrote this gospel, John was seated, reclined very close to Jesus. And so Peter kind of motioned over to John and said, hey, ask Jesus who it is. And so John looks at Jesus and says, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered and said, it is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread once I've dipped it in the wine. So when Jesus dipped the bread in the wine, he gave it to Judas. And then after Judas had taken that morsel of bread, it says that Satan entered into him. Jesus looked at him and said, what you're going to do it quickly. Now, no one that was seated at the table knew why Jesus said this to Judas. They thought maybe since Judas holds the money bags, maybe he's going to go and buy some supplies for the feast, or maybe he's going to go give to the poor. It says after Judas received the morsel, he immediately went out. And it says, and it was night. Now, I know that this is probably describing the time of day it was, nighttime. But I think that maybe it's also kind of calling back to some other verses in the book of John. You see, all throughout the book of John, there's these descriptions and depictions of day and night, of light and darkness. In John chapter 1, it says that Jesus is the light of humanity, that his light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. In chapter 9, Jesus is talking to his disciples, describing to them why they have to work and work hard while it's daytime, because the night is coming. And of course, Jesus knew what that night was. And here we see night is upon them. In this darkest night that Jesus is experiencing, his friend has just betrayed him. He goes on to say this, now the Son of Man is glorified. In my darkest night, now I am glorified. You see, Jesus overcame the darkness by being swallowed up by it and defeating the enemy. Jesus goes on to describe to his disciples how he will be glorified in the Father and the Father in him, and how together they will be glorified. Another thing that really sticks out to me about this passage is the very beginning where it says Jesus was troubled in his spirit. Have you ever felt troubled in your spirit? Have you ever felt that unpeaceful feeling, that turmoil in your soul? Jesus felt that. You know, the book of Hebrews says that we don't have a Savior who is unfamiliar or unsympathetic with our struggles, because he himself has gone through what we have gone through. And so when you feel troubled, maybe you feel troubled right now in your spirit, know that Jesus himself felt troubled when he knew that his close friend would go and betray him. But this is how Jesus responds to being troubled. Not long after he's describing he and the Father being glorified while they're sitting there at the table, he tells his disciples, "Let not your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Put your faith, put your trust in God." You know, as we think about this betrayer of Jesus, Judas, how terrible of a person he was for betraying our Savior. I'm reminded that all sin makes us betrayers of Jesus. All sin separates us from God. But the good thing is that Jesus went to the cross. He died and rose again so that we could be made friends of his. We could be reconciled to God. He took his enemies and turned us into his friends. He took his betrayers and made us his beloved.